Imagine waking up to a world where half the planet has disappeared beneath walls of ice. The oceans have fallen hundreds of feet, exposing endless stretches of barren coastline. Forests have vanished, replaced by frozen grasslands that seem to stretch forever. Winter no longer lasts for months, it dominates entire generations. Temperatures plunge below -60 degrees Celsius. Every breath burns your lungs. Every mistake means death. By every law of evolution, one fragile species should have disappeared from this frozen world first. Us. We weren't the strongest. We weren't the fastest. We didn't have claws, thick fur, or bodies built for the cold, and yet somehow, we survived. Not only did we survive, we inherited the Earth. So how did a nearly hairless ape outlast an ice age that destroyed countless giants? The answer isn't what most people think. Because the greatest weapon our ancestors ever invented wasn't a spear, or fire, or even intelligence. It was something far more unexpected. To understand why Homo sapiens survived, we first have to meet the species that should have beaten us. For more than 100,000 years, Europe belonged to another kind of human, the Neanderthals. Everything about them seemed designed for the Ice Age. Their bodies were shorter and broader, reducing heat loss. Massive muscles wrapped around thick bones capable of enduring the brutal impacts of hunting enormous animals. Wide chests powered immense lungs, while their large noses helped warm the freezing air before it reached them. Even their brains were just as large as ours, and in some individuals, even larger. They mastered fire. They crafted sophisticated stone tools. They hunted dangerous megafauna at close range. And they had already survived countless brutal winters long before Homo sapiens ever entered Europe. If you were forced to predict which human species would dominate an ice age, few would have chosen us. Yet around 40,000 years ago, something changed. Neanderthal populations began to disappear. Within only a few thousand years, they were gone forever. For generations, the explanation seemed simple. Modern humans were smarter. Neanderthals were primitive. But archaeology tells a far more complicated story, and it begins with one of history's biggest misconceptions: the cave. Movies love showing prehistoric people living comfortably inside caves. Reality was often far less inviting. Many caves were damp, poorly ventilated, and filled with smoke whenever fires burned inside. Some were already occupied by cave bears, cave lions, or other dangerous predators seeking shelter from the cold. For early humans, caves were useful at times, but they were rarely the perfect homes popular culture imagines. Instead, Homo sapiens became something much more surprising. They became engineers. Across the frozen plains of what is now Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of extraordinary circular shelters, unlike anything most people expect from the Ice Age. These structures weren't built from wood. There were almost no trees. They weren't built from stone. Instead, they were built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Skulls formed the foundations. Massive jaws locked together to strengthen the walls. Curved tusks arched overhead like giant ribs supporting a dome. Some shelters required the remains of dozens of mammoths, carefully assembled into surprisingly stable structures capable of resisting relentless Arctic winds. These weren't random piles of bones. They were architecture, and they reveal something important. Our ancestors didn't simply adapt to the environment, they reshaped it. But sturdy shelters alone couldn't solve their greatest problem. Even inside these homes, the cold was relentless. Without a way to trap body heat, death was only one blizzard away. And that's when an invention small enough to fit inside your hand quietly changed human history forever. Around 40,000 years ago, a remarkable tool began appearing across Eurasia. At first glance, it looks almost insignificant. a slender piece of polished bone, barely longer than your finger, with a tiny hole drilled through one end. A bone needle. Simple, elegant, revolutionary. Creating one was anything but easy. A craftsperson first shaped a thin sliver of bone, antler, or ivory. Then it had to be carefully polished until every rough edge disappeared. Finally, using delicate stone tools, they drilled an eye so small that even a tiny mistake could snap the entire needle. For thousands of years, humans had worn animal hides draped loosely across their shoulders, fastened together with leather strips. It worked, until the wind arrived. Every movement pumped precious warm air out from beneath the fur, while freezing air rushed inside. In extreme cold, that constant heat loss could quickly become fatal. The bone needle changed everything. Instead of simply wearing animal skins, people began tailoring clothing to fit the human body. Layers of leather and fur were stitched tightly together. Warm air became trapped close to the skin. Outer layers blocked icy winds. Some sewing materials even swelled when damp, helping seal tiny stitch holes against melting snow. For perhaps the first time in history, humans weren't merely enduring the cold. They were controlling it. But surviving the Ice Age required far more than staying warm, because even the best clothing in the world couldn't solve the next problem. A human body wrapped in perfect fur still dies without food. A modern adult typically needs around 2,000 calories a day. An Ice Age hunter could burn nearly 3 times that amount. Every step through knee-deep snow, every hour spent tracking prey, every freezing night was draining energy faster than the human body could replace it. The problem was that the Ice Age offered almost nothing to eat. There were no orchards, no wheat fields, no baskets filled with berries. For much of the year, the frozen steppe produced almost no edible plants at all. To survive, Homo sapiens became one of the most meat-dependent humans in history. Fat became life. Marrow became life. Every successful hunt meant another week of survival. Every failure pushed an entire family closer to starvation. But finding enough food wasn't the only challenge. Cooking it was just as difficult. Fire had always been humanity's greatest ally. Unfortunately, the Ice Age had very few trees. Across enormous stretches of northern Europe, wood was scarce. A campfire couldn't simply be rebuilt every evening. Fuel itself became a survival problem. So our ancestors found another solution, one hidden inside the very animals they hunted. Fresh bones still filled with fat and marrow burned surprisingly well. When combined with rendered animal fat, they created slow-burning fires capable of producing heat for hours. Archaeological evidence from Ice Age camps suggests that animal remains weren't simply discarded after a hunt. Almost every part of the carcass had value. Meat became food, hide became clothing, tendons became thread, bones became tools, and even the leftovers helped keep the fire alive. Nothing was wasted. In a world where every calorie mattered, efficiency became survival. Yet even with warm clothing and reliable fires, people still faced an almost impossible question. How do you kill an animal that outweighs your entire tribe? Imagine standing in front of a woolly mammoth, nearly 4 meters tall, weighing as much as 6 family cars, covered in thick insulating fur, armed with tusks longer than a grown man. Hollywood often shows prehistoric hunters driving mammoths into giant pits lined with sharpened stakes. It's an unforgettable image, but many archaeologists doubt that such traps could have been the primary hunting strategy across the frozen north. Much of the ground was locked beneath layers of permafrost, soil so hard that digging enormous pits with stone tools would have been extraordinarily difficult. Instead, evidence points towards something even more impressive: human planning. Rather than relying on strength, hunters learned the landscape better than any predator alive. They studied migration routes, season after season, year after year. They knew where herds crossed rivers, where valleys narrowed, where muddy ground slowed enormous animals. Instead of attacking mammoths on open ground, they waited until nature stacked the odds in their favor. Only then did they strike. Not with reckless charges, but from a distance. Lightweight spears, stone points, coordinated attacks. Every hunter had a role. Every movement was planned. One mistake could cost several lives. One successful hunt could feed an entire community. But even bringing down a mammoth created another problem, one that sounds almost impossible today. There was simply too much food. A single mammoth could provide thousands of pounds of meat, far more than one small group could eat before it spoiled. Leaving it exposed wasn't an option. The smell alone would attract wolves, hyenas, and other scavengers from miles away. So humans transformed the Ice Age itself into a giant freezer. In regions where the ground remained permanently frozen, meat could be stored beneath the surface for extended periods. Instead of racing against decay, our ancestors learned to preserve enormous food reserves through the long Arctic winter. For the first time, a successful hunt could support people long after the animal had died. It was one more way Homo sapiens refused to play by nature's rules. But even these remarkable innovations couldn't explain why our species survived, while another human species vanished. Because the greatest advantage Homo sapiens ever developed wasn't a tool. It wasn't fire. It wasn't clothing. It wasn't even hunting. It was something no one could hold in their hands. Something invisible. And it would change the course of human history forever. By now, Homo sapiens had solved problems that should have been impossible. They built shelters from mammoth bones. They stitched insulated clothing that trapped precious body heat. They learned to preserve food through endless winters. They mastered the movements of giant animals across frozen landscapes. By every practical measure, they had become the most adaptable humans the Ice Age had ever seen. So why did they still come dangerously close to extinction? Because the Ice Age was never a single, endless winter. It was unpredictable. Entire generations could enjoy relatively stable conditions, only to watch the climate collapse within decades. Grasslands disappeared. Animal migrations shifted hundreds of miles. Rivers froze along new paths. Hunting grounds that had fed families for centuries suddenly became empty. The environment kept changing the rules, and every time it did, humanity was forced to adapt again. Genetic evidence suggests that at several points in our prehistoric past, the global population of Homo sapiens shrank dramatically. Some studies estimate that the breeding population may have fallen to only a few thousand individuals. Think about that for a moment. Every person alive today, more than 8 billion of us, may descend from an astonishingly small number of survivors who endured one of the harshest climates our species has ever faced. Humanity wasn't guaranteed to survive. It almost didn't. One prolonged famine, one devastating epidemic, or one failed migration could have ended our story forever. But something extraordinary happened. Instead of turning inward, our ancestors reached outward. Most animals respond to scarcity in the same way. Protect what little you have. Defend your territory. Drive outsiders away. For early humans, that strategy could have been fatal. A single valley could no longer support an entire community if the herds disappeared. Staying meant starvation. So Homo sapiens chose something almost unheard of in the animal kingdom. They trusted strangers. Not always, not everywhere, but often enough to change history. Across Europe, archaeologists have uncovered remarkably similar ornaments, tools, pigments, and carved figurines separated by hundreds, even thousands of kilometers. These objects suggest that distant communities shared ideas, materials, and perhaps even cultural traditions. Some researchers believe these shared symbols helped create trust between groups that had never met before. If so, they may have served a role surprisingly similar to a common language, or even a prehistoric passport. Imagine your hunting grounds have failed. Winter is approaching. Your children haven't eaten properly for days. You have only one chance. Walk into unfamiliar territory. Find another tribe. Hope they welcome you instead of killing you. That level of cooperation required something no spear could create: trust. Communities exchanged stone from distant quarries. Marine shells traveled hundreds of kilometers inland. Ideas spread, skills spread, people spread. Instead of surviving as isolated families, Homo sapiens slowly became something much larger: a network. If one region suffered, another could help. If one herd vanished, another community knew where food could still be found. Knowledge became as valuable as meat. Relationships became as valuable as weapons. For perhaps the first time in Earth's history, survival itself became a shared effort. And that may have been the greatest evolutionary advantage our species ever developed. People often imagine the Ice Age as an era that turned humans into ruthless savages. But the evidence points towards something far more remarkable. The cold didn't simply test humanity, it transformed humanity. It forced us to become planners instead of wanderers, engineers instead of survivors, collaborators instead of competitors. The Ice Age didn't just shape our bodies, it shaped our civilization. Long before cities, before farming, before writing, our ancestors had already discovered the one invention that mattered most: cooperation. Because in the end, it wasn't the strongest human species that inherited the Earth. It wasn't the fastest or the largest. It was the one that learned a simple truth: no one survives the Ice Age alone. Every city standing today, every language ever spoken, every scientific discovery, every family alive on Earth exists because a small group of frightened people refused to face the frozen world by themselves. They looked into a landscape that should have killed them, and together they refused to let humanity disappear. That wasn't just how we survived the Ice Age, it's how we became human.